From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the business of esports. The Business of Esports podcast is sponsored by Esports Entertainment Group, a leading esports and online gambling company. For more information, go check them out at esportsentertainmentgroup.com. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Dewalibi. I'm joined today by my friends and co-hosts Jimmy Barada and William Collis. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for all the love, the 5-star ratings and reviews. If you haven't yet, please go tell your friends about the podcast, tell your colleagues, randomly shout it out in the street if you have to, but find other people to tell about the podcast, or go leave a 5-star rating and review if you love it. It's a great way for others to help find the podcast. And if you haven't yet, just a reminder, and I remind you guys every week, go leave a review on William's book, The Book of Esports, on Amazon. I know so many of you, I know thousands and thousands of you have bought it and read it and love it. Make sure you go leave a review. And oh yeah, by the way, the Spanish language edition, which I'm not going to butcher. How are you guys doing today?
Drowning in opportunity, Paul.
back in New York, at least for me. I know, Jimmy, you're back in LA. So sorry, last week was a bit scuffed. The hotel room podcast.
I didn't think it was bad quality, Paul. Honestly, I thought you guys did a great job managing it from the road, to be fair.
It was the best I think we could have done, given the circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting. It's funny because the hotel I was staying at in Vegas, and we knew this going into it, but I didn't think it was set up or open, but has an entire podcast studio, like state of the art, which I passed by just as I was leaving to take pictures, and it's actually amazing. So there was no reason really for us to do a scuffed podcast from the hotel room, because there was literally this beautiful state of the art.
Other than you want to remind people that you're on the road, like you're traveling for the story, right? Like,
true. Yeah. True.
Mm-hmm. I would move there for that stadium, or for that, I don't know, stadium. I just have that in my mind because it was so incredible. But I would move there for that studio. It was incredible. It really was. Those photos you sent, a lot better than the curtain background that I ended up streaming from that day. The curtains by my hotel window.
You can instantly tell it's a hotel stream by the curtains. There's a special type of curtain that only hotels have. So.
I will say though, guys, as much as we geek out over video games here, I did have the chance to geek out over another kind of game, and maybe even more so than the game, but just I was in awe at the production sort of machine around. I got to go see a live taping of BattleBots. You guys into this? You guys know what I'm talking about?
BattleBots. Are you kidding?
Who doesn't know BattleBots?
So I took 4 hours out of my day to go watch a live taping of BattleBots, which, again, the production value is so high that their whole team is like top notch, but it is spectacular to watch in person. Like, it's one of these things where I feel like this is the intermediary step between sports and esports. Is that fair to say? It's sort of like a middle step.
It's a stretch, but I mean, it's cool. I'm not going to fault you for checking out BattleBots. It's pretty awesome.
It was me and a bunch of 10-year-olds just losing their minds over it.
I don't get why that show is not more popular. It's like basically the closest we can get to MechWarrior. Like, it's like
to be fair, I think it's pretty popular. They've done like
30 seasons or something.
Yeah. Was it 30? I thought it was less, but
I think it's been on for forever. It's been on for forever. Yeah.
So they're doing something right, and it is a lot of fun. But we always have these discussions of, is it an esport or not? Like, if chess is an esport, why can't BattleBots be an esport, William? Why not?
I mean, we can't have this debate again at the beginning of a podcast, Paul.
I know,
Sure,
I know.
BattleBots can be an esport. You win. You love it so much. It's official. It's that it goes. The rankings go. Call of Duty, Valorant, BattleBots.
I just needed validation that the professor says it's okay as an esport.
Right now, XQC is only streaming BattleBots. He announced it September only.
All right, we do have some amazing guests today, so I don't want to take any more time here. Actually, amazing guests, and one returning guest. A two-time guest, and the two guests we have today are none other than Steve Blickensderfer and Nate Blair. Both of them are in-house lawyers at Krafton. Those of you who don't know Krafton, they're the makers of PUBG. Steve advises the business on regulatory compliance issues, including global privacy. And before that, actually, when he was on the podcast, he led a video game and esports practice at AM Law 200 law firm and helped tech companies with their global privacy compliance programs. Nate, in terms of his background, he advises Krafton on business matters and esports matters, as well as other corporate and commercial matters and transactions. Before that, he was general counsel at High Res Studios and Skillshot Media. Steve and Nate, welcome to the Business of Esports podcast.
Thanks for having us, Paul. William, Jimmy, appreciate it.
And Steve, welcome back in a very prestigious two-time club now.
I really appreciate it. Not to be confused with the other two-time. This is a different two-time, and I understand there's not that many of us, so I'm really relishing this.
Oh, so hold on, Steve. Now hold on. Now this is going to go off the rails real quick, okay? Usually there's a flow to this. I give you guys sort of the opportunity to talk about your backgrounds, but you brought up the two-time, okay? Mm-hmm. And I have to put you on the spot here as the only two-time lawyer on this podcast, I guess, other than Jimmy, who doesn't really count here. But,
I wouldn't count me. So.
What did you think of the whole Doc suing Twitch saga that we discussed last week? I don't know if you followed that story at all, or
I didn't know if he had filed anything, but
no, he just declared that he was going to sue Twitch for and Jimmy had his own thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's an expletive in his statement about it. Right.
Yes.
I don't know what the reason is. Apparently he does, and he's not happy with it. And this just brings up a really good concept of a platform or a game that creates opportunities for folks to develop businesses, and what happens if they are terminated from the services, and what kind of contracts are you signing when you install a game or you sign up for a platform. Those are contracts, and it'd be interesting to see how that one plays out.
So do you buy, because Jimmy and I sort of disagreed on this, but do you buy this idea that because they didn't reveal the reason for his exit at Twitch, right, for his ban from Twitch, that it allowed people's imaginations to go wild, therefore hurting his brand? Like, is there some legal liability around people's imaginations?
No, not really. It's interesting to see how that might influence, this theory of what kind of damages does he have. But I think if anything, it's this. And what I understood from what he was talking about on his stream, it's the reputational damage, brands that want to do business with him. And that can be something. It just depends on, again, what kind of theories can he present in a case, and what did he agree or disclaim in his agreements with Twitch when he signed on the platform?
Well, Steve, just kind of broader question connecting this. There's a whole thing going on right now about deplatforming across all social media, not just Twitch. Mm-hmm. I guess the question I would ask is, and this is, again, without speculating on any specific details, is there something unique about Twitch and esports as a platform that would make Doc's case different from, say, a celebrity who was kicked off of Twitter, right? Like deplatformed on a social media like that. Is there something, or is it fair to say that, Twitch and Doc is an analog for any influencer being forced off of a social media platform?
I think it's the latter. I think, I'm not sure, and Nate could probably speak to this a little bit more. He's got more esports experience than me on the contract side, but I don't see how esports presents any more opportunities than maybe an influencer on a platform that just has opportunities to be a sponsor. There might be unique damages, but I think for the most part, it's a pretty good analog.
Yeah, I think I would generally agree. I think one thing that's going to be sort of interesting, like, look, if you really ever saw or see the light of day, right, an actual legal fight between them, to the point of sort of damages, right, you moving past whether or not, some sort of, TOS violation took place. But for a figure, right, who kind of built himself from the beginning as this sort of, almost, controversy seeking, like over the top character, it does feel a little bit harder, I think, to, make the argument that, the character was really hurt there, right? I mean, wasn't his brand always sort of, a little bit, I'm that rogue character, right? This over the top legend of a guy, right? So I think in a lot of ways, there's probably an argument that, Twitch would make that, the controversy helped him. Of course, he'll say, well, what sponsor wanted to touch me with the controversy? And I think some of those same sponsors head for the exits around the time that he exited the bathroom door. Might have been the fair way to look at that.
Yeah. I was going to say two follow-ups to that. The first is, a little known case, Phantom Lore brought against Twitch. That is a case that actually went to trial on a Twitch streamer, or the contract that you get when you unload the TOS onto the system. And actually the damages clause in that contract at the time was shot down as unconscionable under California law. So it's interesting. These cases could develop into something, but as Nate said, we'll see if that actually comes to the light of day, if it'll ever be filed.
Jimmy, I'm going to cut you off right here, okay? Because what's most disappointing is all three lawyers agreed with each other. You guys all.
That's why we need more lawyers on the show. Not only are they punctual, but they're brilliant, right? Like, they all came to a great conclusion.
Guys, I'm sorry I dove into that. It's something I really wanted to get your thoughts on. But before we get into any more stuff, Steve, Nate, maybe for our audience, and Steve, for you, who maybe didn't hear or see the first episode, would love a bit of your backgrounds, your stories, how you got into gaming, what you're focused on now at Krafton, some of the things you guys are working on, looking at, excited about, just a bit of the Steve and Nate story.
Thanks. Yeah, no, as probably all of your guests, lifetime gamer, built computers in high school, started a clan. Actually, if anybody's knowledgeable about BFME, Battle for Middle Earth, back in the day, had a pretty successful clan around that game.
Wait, is that the RTS?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, they still have pretty cool tournaments for that, actually, that you can watch. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, there's because I actually quite like that game, and I was checking it out on YouTube recently. There's still an active competitive scene for it. So
yeah, no, we were very successful as a clan. Made no money. This is before any sponsors would throw anything at you. But fast forward from that game to circa 2011, went to law school, then joined a firm. Had no life to really game or anything, and then at some point realized in my career I wanted to try to do something or focus in an area that I was really passionate about and interested in, which is what brought me to gaming, what led me to start a practice at the firm I was at, kind of created opportunities there. And one of the other areas I was focused on is privacy and regulatory, compliance around privacy. And in the privacy realm, obviously, unless you're living under a rock, privacy is really top of mind for companies these days. And so, whereas maybe 2 years ago, companies were heavily leaning on outside counsel for most of their privacy compliance because they didn't have that specialty in-house. Fast forward to today, a lot of those companies are bringing that talent in-house. So when I'm looking for opportunities for me, what would take me away from an otherwise successful practice that's growing that I'm really interested in is a gaming company that's looking to bring in someone who does privacy work. And it was just too good of an opportunity for me. And so I joined Krafton a couple months ago, and actually Nate joined them before I did. So I'll let him tell his story, but it's been an awesome opportunity to be on the other side of the curtain and be providing advice. I guess for those that might not know, as your in-house counsel, you have one client, and that client's the company you're working for. So I get to have a deeper knowledge of the client's, understanding and pain points and opportunities as it relates to the stuff that I do and bring to bear, which is privacy and other regulatory stuff. So it's a little bit about me.
And one last thing about Steve, which kind of bridges the gap between us. So when we needed a privacy attorney, I reached out to Steve. One, because he is a really excellent attorney, and two, a good guy. But three, and probably most importantly, we get a recruiting bonus if we recruit the person who joins the company. So, it was
+1 for Nate.
It was kind of an easy call there.
Yeah. Nice.
I don't know if you probably have to stick around a year or something. I don't know. I don't think I got that bonus yet, but anyway.
Wow.
Cool.
I mean, that sounds like leverage, Steve, to me. I mean, right? You should at least get some piece of this.
I'm marking day 364 on my calendar right now.
So yes, Steve and I did actually know each other before joining Krafton. And just from kind of both kind of being out there and in the industry and meeting at events and stuff like that. So for me, I maybe more better described as a lifelong bad gamer. I'm probably consistently terrible at most things I've played, but they can still be fun. I do go back to Intellivision as my first console, so I've got some old stuff. I did see, by the way, Intellivision has a retro console that they're coming out with, and at a price point that was about 4 times the retro NES price point. So, the very proud, I guess, television gamers.
You pay for the quality,
Yeah. You pay to own something that is so rare, but no, they actually do have a decent number of pre-orders. Anyway, so I before joining the gaming world professionally, so I worked at a large law firm similar to Steve, doing mostly transactional regulatory work, but also doing traditional sports work. So my firm, Fuller & Lardner, was one of the kind of top sports law practices, especially with respect to Major League Baseball. So that was definitely something that, I enjoyed a lot. And, through a friend, the opportunity came up to, talk to Hi-Res when they were looking for somebody. And really a lot of it for me was the opportunity to get involved in esports. And in part because, everything is sort of new, right? You're, part of building an industry that is able to sort of take from the past all of the good lessons from traditional sports, other forms of entertainment, but you're not sort of bound to do stuff that, has been done one way for 120 years, right? Or whatever. So, that was definitely, kind of a big draw. And so Hi-Res, which created Skillshot, was also very fun because we not only were a tournament operator for Hi-Res's games, but also for other third-party publishers. Which was kind of a interesting sort of approach that, obviously not sort of the typical approach. So then I joined Krafton last year, kind of early pandemic era, so a little over, a year here, and doing mostly esports and investment stuff. So it's been great, enjoyed a lot. And, my 2 favorite esports to watch are actually Smite and PUBG. So it's, maybe there's some bias in that.
Not biased at all here.
not biased at all, but
no Heroes of the Storm for you, Nate? No HOTS? I thought we had a good track record of HOTS fans on the podcast. So
I maybe I'd still be watching it if if that was an option.
If anyone was playing it.
Yeah. No, actually PUBG, in all sincerity, I mean, I really enjoy, watching it, from the beginning. It's always been something I've enjoyed watching. So, getting a chance to, kind of be involved in the esports, for it was definitely, an awesome thing.
Guys, I have so many questions about PUBG and PUBG Mobile.
Yeah,
It's a recurring sort of topic on the podcast. But before that, I just have a general question for both of you, which is, and I'm fascinated because I've asked other lawyers who have come on the podcast the same question. How much of the work you're doing day to day is really sort of novel, sort of creating new precedent, charting a sort of a course that no one has charted before? And how much of it are you sort of just looking at general entertainment, like the movie, music, TV, traditional sports industries, and saying, hey, we can borrow this, there's precedent, we can use this, how much are you leaning on other media versus sort of having to do really sort of novel and innovative work?
I'll start because I've thought hard about this before as it relates to what I do, which is a little different than what Nate does. But I'll preface all this with, because we're starting off this pod, that nothing we say is legal advice, right? And nothing we say is on behalf of the company. It's all just me and Nate in our personal capacities. But as I thought about that, privacy and its compliance obligations are relevant to every industry, every business. But you need to think about how that particular legislation, that law, impacts this company. And where does this company sit in its industry? What is unique about privacy compliance obligations to a gaming company versus a bank, healthcare company, things like that? So to the extent, are you just applying what's been brought in from another company as it relates to compliance, regulatory stuff? You can't forget what's unique about your company. It's what you have to think and look at what your other companies are doing in the space. Maybe, understanding most companies consider, they have, getting into privacy, right? Do not sell is a big thing under California law. Do they have the links on their websites? What are they saying in their privacy policies? You have to look at that, right? And you kind of have to understand what your industry is doing. So in that respect, you have to be particular and unique, but you can still apply the same kind of foundational tools that other industries are doing. And that, I have a feeling, bleeds into a lot of what Nate might be doing, but it's certainly true for something like privacy. The foundational building blocks of building those kinds of programs are pretty much the same for most companies.
Nate, is that true on the esports side as well?
Yeah, I'd say it's a mix. You look at both, precedent from, traditional sports. You look at, precedent from, other forms of entertainment, probably traditional sports more than, sorry about that, traditional sports more than anything else outside of esports. But, there is also a lot of things that, just are different, right? Or issues that, don't come up. I think as lawyers, you, of course, do also need to bear in mind that, we live in this world that, generally speaking, a lot of things get settled based on precedent, right? If there is precedent, right? And, even if there was a judge, right, who might be looking at, something for, the first time, right? Some esports related issue that lands in front of a judge that really has not been considered before, the judge is still going to try and he wants something to look at, right? And so they're going to look for corollaries themselves. So I think you do have to be cognizant of that. And I think you also have to be cognizant that there's sort of a court of public opinion to a sense, right? And you've got a number of, people in your audience. Yeah, jump in, William.
Oh, no. I keep going. I have kind of a crazy question building off Paul. It's blatant speculation. But, one thing I'm wondering about is, you think of how legal landscape and precedent gets set, particularly in the United States, and a huge portion of that is Supreme Court rulings, right? Question is to my knowledge, I don't believe there's been an esports case before the Supreme Court. But if I can prompt you guys to speculate, if we're talking about new precedent and sort of innovation in the industry, is there an area of esports law, a topic, a controversy that you guys would put a bingo chip down now as the first esports case to get heard by, the U.S. Supreme Court? And again, I'm not asking you to name specific companies or anything, but like an area of controversy or practice, just like to understand where esports is really pushing the boundaries of, law, at least in the United States.
I'll take a speculative guess here. And while it might not be it could be it could involve esports, it could not. But gambling, I think gambling is one area that, maybe there's something that comes up, and to speculate what comes before the Supreme Court, obviously it needs to be some sort of federal law, some sort of question, or, diverse parties or something, right? But I think gambling could be one. I think there's some unique stuff in video games, much less in esports related to gambling. And there's lots of legal questions there. And we've only begun to scratch the surface, as you've probably been talking about on past episodes. Country over here now considering loot box mechanics to be a form of gambling, or just gambling itself, and where the lines are. And to the extent that those interfere with federal laws, who knows, we might see something there.
I thought, Steve, that was one of my favorite episodes of yours back in the day, was your loot box episode, and the discussion that you guys had around that. I think it was a hot topic, specifically with the European Union, right, and how they were regulating that kind of developing area. That was over a year ago, so I feel like we're due for an update. Maybe there's a esports business of esports special loot box edition.
For starters, Jimmy, there's surprise mechanics, not loot boxes. I don't.
That's right. They're just in-game transactions, So, no, I there's so much there, but I don't necessarily think it'll be a loot box case. I think it'll be just a kind of more of a discrete gambling issue, if it was anything. But this is to hit on that issue of how long it might take for that kind of case to percolate up to the highest level. It would be, could be a long time. So I think, if anything, we've got a recent case from Washington on the issue of loot boxes or in-game transactions that kind of, whether it's gambling or not. And that was just at the trial level in federal court. So it takes a long time.
Yeah. And when you specifically talk about Supreme Court too, you're talking about, there's very few cases that they take, right? And a lot of times they're not going to take something. One of the classic scenarios in which they take something is when you have a split amongst the appellate courts, right? So where different courts are deciding something in different ways, that's one of the classic scenarios where the Supreme Court will step in to try and bring clarity, on an issue. So I think until you start to develop, right, almost sort of differences of opinion of how courts are settling things, hard to say what could reach that level. But yeah.
I'm curious, PUBG has been at the center of a lot of, I don't know if I'd call them legal battles, but it's been because of the huge platform that it is, with the, hundreds of millions of players that it has. It's been at the center of a few of these sort of hot button issues, right? So I don't know if you guys can comment on, PUBG was basically banned in India, right? Like where PUBG Mobile is your biggest market, and you guys, Krafton, had to do some jujitsu around the name or the game. Or I'm curious if you guys can comment on those kind of regulatory country-based issues, maybe specific or not specific to PUBG, but also just in terms of PUBG Mobile being the success that it has been. What other landmines come up around mobile? Like, Steve, I'm sure there are privacy issues, right, with all the IDFA and Apple's ecosystem not allowing sort of information to pass through to developers like you guys. I'm just curious, what are some of the hot button issues around PUBG that you guys spend a lot of time around, if not those two?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. Fortunately for me, it was before my time at Krafton, so I could dodge that bullet pretty easily by saying I don't know very much about it. But I will answer your general question about what are kind of the issues that affect us, right? If you think about it, it's a game company that has a game that's dispersed throughout the world. So to publish a global game, to not only develop it, to publish it, means you got to comply with all these regional quirks, right? Germany's got some weird laws, no red blood, no swastikas. India had its rulings against a particular company that basically took the game out of the country for a while. and had to be reworked in such a way that it could be reintroduced to the company or to the country. But that's not the only country that took issue with a particular game, if not PUBG, if I'm not mistaken. I think there were some other countries that it banned or is still banned. I just don't remember off the top of my head. But it just goes to show you the struggle with publishing globally. You can't take the same game and just expect for it to be okay everywhere. And for me, a lot of the challenge relates to now we're talking about the data that flows to that game. And where is it okay to take the data to transfer it so that you can service the game, let alone deploy it and how it looks, right? So once you pass, it gets through the gate. Now it's the maintenance and servicing of the game, and where's the data located? Do you have to keep a copy there? Do you have to let local jurisdiction know of what your game does or what the data transfers are? It's gotten really complicated, as you can imagine, as we're just a game that's now it's a platform as a service, or it's a game as a service. So it's not just a local copy with no data being shared to provide the game. So those are the types of things that, at least for me, I'm squarely dealing with every day. And it's just that the laws are changing so quickly. Last week, if not, was the Friday before, China passed its new privacy law, which will go into effect later this fall. India is expected to pass a similar privacy law that's effective like immediately. Where we're used to hearing some laws allow for like 2 years to prepare for it. So these laws are just immediate, like once, effective once it's passed for the most part. So the goalposts are changing very rapidly. And for me, my focus is a lot on data and what we're doing with data, what we're allowed to do with data, what we should be doing with data to be fair to players, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the challenges, at least, that keep me up at night.
Steve, do you feel like a lot of it is overreaching, though, on these governments or countries' parts? Like, is part of it the problem today that, people are looking, or governments, some governments at least, are looking at video games like rap music in the 90s, right? Where it was, this is bad for the kids, so we need to regulate it heavily. And do you think this regulatory environment will ease significantly over the next 10 years? Do you think it gets more complex, less complex?
I think it's going to get more, and I think that's a product of just it being a very it's a lucrative business, right? It's one of the biggest entertainment sections or subsets of the entertainment industry, and I think because of that, there's just more eyes on it. If there's more investment money in it, there's going to regulation will follow, and I think it's not bad to have different countries kind of test out regulation on a tech industry, right? Let's take, for example, the age, restricting children from playing certain many hours of the game of a week, right? China just recently upped its restrictions to an hour, right? Where it did have restrictions there before. Whereas South Korea, without much fanfare or news, announced, I think the week before that they were withdrawing the mandatory. You have to, you're limited to X hours if you're a child under the age of X. And they made it an opt-in process where if you are a parent, you can opt your child in so it can be limited. So South Korea tried it out and figured that it was actually better to make it opt-in. And maybe that will be the path that proves to be more successful for a country that wants to regulate this, because not everybody's the same at the end of the day, which is why I think we're going to have regulation regardless, because not everybody looks at it the same way.
Yep.
Nate, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in terms of increasing or decreasing complexity.
I think it increases. I think that, one, I agree with everything Steve said, not surprising there. But I mean, it's surprising, just even in the last, call it 5 years, as I have conversations with people, and I think the pandemic really pushed to the forefront a lot of realizations from people outside of video games, outside of esports, that just the sheer size of the industry. As Steve notes, I mean, it is mammoth at a level that I think most people outside the industry, even a lot of gamers, don't realize, right? I mean, from a revenue standpoint, video games is bigger than every other form of entertainment media combined, right? Bigger than movies, plus TV, plus books, plus magazines, plus music. It is bigger than all of that combined from a revenue standpoint. And I think that, governments are slow with everybody else to kind of catch up and sort of realize that. But I think that, it will just continue to grow. And certainly for a company like ours, which is, in, every corner of the world, it does present, a lot of interesting and fun challenges, for, the legal departments and others to work through.
So you guys alluded to this article, this 3 hours a week playtime's over for China's young video gamers. So this is new regulation, right? That came in from China. So if you're under 18, you basically can't play more than 3 hours a week. How, as a business, do you guys get ahead of this kind of thing? Or is it very much, everyone's reacting to it? It almost feels like there has to be really close ties between legal and like development, right? Where they need to change the game based on legal requirements more than in any other industry or in tech or in software in general. But I'm curious, what are some of the strategies you guys use? Like, how are you thinking about getting ahead of some of these things or reacting to them, if at all?
No, that's a great question. And I think it depends on what the regulation is. So using China as an example, I think a couple of years ago, 18, if I'm not mistaken, they stopped accepting and issuing licenses for games to be introduced into the Chinese market. That's not something you can prepare for. So there's certain government actions that are going to catch you by surprise or just be like, what just happened? And how do you prepare for something like that? That was, I think, a new and novel thing that was one of those. It could be a risk. It is it's all risk based, right? That's a lot of what we do. Is what we're about to tell you. You can't eliminate the risk, but I can help you weigh it so that you business can help figure out what you want to do on this circumstance. So there are certain things you can't anticipate, and then there are certain things you can. You can see the writing on the wall. Let's use Section 230 as an example, kind of bringing it home. That's something that the government is looking at it and might be changing the rules about what the rules are with respect to publishing on a platform if you're just the platform provider, right? Or going back to China, them restricting the age or the time that minors play to make it even less time. But there it was, they already had rules in place. So to anticipate that they could tighten it up a little bit makes a little bit of sense and could be anticipated. But you have to have a business that or business folks that pivot and are able to adapt. And I've been lucky enough here so far to see the business has been able to be nimble and change things, and that's been great.
Just Steve, particularly on the restricting playtime point, that seems so unique to esports to me. Unless I'm completely crazy, other than maybe mobile gaming, right? I'm not really aware of other industries. Like I'm not aware of a government that restricts the number of hours a kid can read a book, right? Or restricts the number of movies that you can watch in a week. Is that a good example of novel stuff here? Or, is there no? I mean, is there something unique around the playtime restriction issue that games are surfacing as a legal platform?
I'm not sure. So William, I actually would so I'll push back slightly on the idea that we don't have similar things in some other areas, right? So if you look at, for example, youth sports, very commonly there are limits on the number of hours teams can practice, the number of days a week they can practice. That's a very common thing. I don't know when those sorts of laws came into place, but they were certainly in place when I was in high school. I think that you probably do have, I would imagine, some schools that put some amount of attempts into trying to limit like how much homework kids might be given. Obviously, child labor laws, you could even say are in some ways, kind of getting at some of the same concepts.
But those seem a little materially different because those are sort of assigned, right? Like one is your coach telling you have to practice 10 hours or else you have to do this homework or else. This is like discretionary. As far as I'm aware, it's not like the kids are being forced to play. I mean, I'm just trying to
Yeah, no, that's fair.
But I agree with you. I'm just kind of trying to tease out the issue a little bit because I think it's interesting. I think there's some nuance here that is exciting, scary, and it's important to protect children and all these things. But it does seem a little bit of an uncharted frontier in some ways.
No, I think there are.
Yeah,
I was going to say there's lots of examples of unique laws that affect video games that you can't find anywhere else, right? This is kind of one of those that's on the line. But I mean, and Nate can speak to this probably better than me. There's lots of esports laws out of South Korea that only exist because of video games and esports in particular, to the point where you have a regulator that focuses on the esports scene in Korea, and that's not something you're going to find in any other industry.
Would now be a good time to talk about the Heroes of the Storm law that South Korea.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
there's your plug, William.
I gotta get HOTS in every podcast. I'm saying, guys, it's an amazing game. You gotta play it.
Yeah, wasn't it passed because they didn't pay the participants or the players or whatever, right?
Steve would know. Steve and Nate would know better than I would. Yeah. Is there something worth commenting on it? That's what the HOTS law is, right?
Yep. Basically, yeah. That's where you're going to find a reaction to an event that caused damages, right? Whether to egos or to actual someone's pocket or otherwise their businesses, and then a regulator looking at it saying, "Hey, we want to avoid that from happening," and make a law that makes it so that you can't just pull the plug on a scene like that. So yeah, that's a direct reaction. It's hard not to see that. So and then let's look more recently at what South Korea did with respect to the whole Epic Apple fight, right? There's a big discussion about in-game payment process and the antitrust stuff surrounding that. And so South Korea is now introducing legislation, and we're returning to South Korea in many ways because they're a forefront of video game legislation, like, full stop. And so one of the examples here is we're now broadening it to apps and allowing app developers to notify the players, the users, hey, there's a website where you could go and you can buy this. It's either cheaper or maybe I get more of a cut, whatever it ends up being.
Guys, I want to dig in on this a little bit because this and maybe it's a conversation that straddles law and business here, but I was very critical of Epic in their fight against Apple, in the sense that I think they took on the 800-pound gorilla. They thought the 800-pound gorilla wouldn't hit back. Apple hit back, and sort of Epic has found itself in this lawsuit that up until very recently, I would argue, was sort of going nowhere. They had lost a few key jurisdictions and things like that, and it was sort of going nowhere, and it felt like a crusade on the part of Tim Sweeney, who wanted to change the industry, right, and change how things worked. Was there any conscious discussion, if you can't talk to it, no problem, but like with Epic and Fortnite sort of leading the way in this crusade, was there ever sort of a thought on the side of Krafton or PUBG to say, hey, we should pile on here, right? Now's the chance. We'll link arms with Fortnite and Epic, and we'll go after Apple, and we'll get this changed. Because when you have, I don't know, how many PUBG mobile players today, like 100 million or 150 million or, some massive number.
It's that infinite symbol that you see. There's too many at this point.
It's too many, right? Like every percentage point from the App Store cut makes a very big difference. Yeah. Was there ever any thought to sort of pile on and join their crusade? Or
I can dodge the bullet again because I wasn't there for that, so I'll pass it on to Nate.
Yeah, I think we will have to probably decline to sort of get into Krafton specific on that. Other than I will point out it's actually one with a B after it in terms of PUBG Mobile player accounts.
There you go.
Earlier this year, Congrats. It did go over 1 billion. But look, I think that Tim, and Epic, I say Tim like I know him, but Tim Sweeney and Epic certainly have they have picked some other battles to wade into, right? And this is not the first of the distributors that they've taken on, right? I mean, they took on Steam, right?
And Google.
Yeah, and it's, and don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously, the Epic Games Store has, you know, uh, you know, uh, I actually don't know whether or not it actually makes them money, right? But it has become certainly, a piece of their business that has been around for a while, and looks like it for all I can tell, it's going to continue to be a competitor to Steam, and I think that competition generally is a good thing for video game developers.
Just a question on that, and again, if you guys can't comment on this, it's okay. But isn't there a contradiction in strategy on the part of the Fortnite creators of Fortnite Epic Games, both basically suing a distribution platform saying, "Hey, you shouldn't have this much power," and then creating their own distribution platform, presumably to get more power, right? Like, isn't it sort of the thing where a victory in one sphere is a loss for them in the other, right? Because presumably any weakening of Apple or Google's platform laws would also weaken the power of their own distribution platform that they're creating. I mean, I'm just curious, like, is that a fair conflict or tension to draw, or is there not a parallel there legally?
I mean, there might be a business consideration there, right? But I don't know that there is necessarily a conflict to some degree in the position, um, you know, dumbed down to the point of almost inaccuracy, right? Part of what they're saying against, Apple and Google is there should be more choice here, right? And by creating a distribution platform for the PC, they are creating more choice for, game developers to distribute their games. Around that same time, Discord, came out with their store, which didn't gather the same amount of players and developers, but I think that it has been a meaningful thing, right, to have that viable competitor to Steam. So I think if you think of it just in terms of additional creating more competition, I think that there's some consistency in that way.
I just found it interesting because, sorry, Jimmy, I don't know if you wanted to jump in, but I think what I found particularly interesting was I didn't see everyone sort of all the other big platforms jump to sort of Epic's side. And I guess, I will always be curious, were there discussions in back rooms and in boardrooms with lawyers going, let them fight it, right? Like, let them deal with that. If it turns out, to benefit us, great. And it sort of has played out that way, right? Like, I assume this ruling, and I'll just bring it up here, in this policy change, Apple's going to allow developers to email customers about alternatives to App Store billing. I mean, I guess, Krafton could contact customers, PUBG players directly, and, sell them things, cosmetics, through a separate store that's not the App Store, or, that's not in-game, built in-game.
It's just interesting on that that development is happening when the judge has this case pending for summary judgment ruling, and it's the same judge. She is going to rule on whether or not it's appropriate to approve of that settlement which has been presented to her, and at the same time she's going to be considering all the legal issues before her, and if any are factual or need the facts sussed out, she's going to let it go to trial. It's just that is an additional wrinkle there, and the fact that Epic's already come out and really criticized that settlement. It's interesting to see how that just developed all of a sudden, and then you loop in South Korea coming out with a law that it seems that Epic is favorable with, and like that new law that's coming out. It's interesting how this just all happened in the same week, and it, I think directly bears on the pending case.
What's your take, Steve, on the privacy implications where now my email and my contact that I've given to Apple is now going directly to the developer, who can email me directly and try and solicit my in-app purchase through their port, right? Like, in some of my startup projects, the hardest time I had was when we were working in certain partnerships. Everyone wanted access not just to the data, but to the users that we would sign up, or to the users that we would, onboard or display our content to. And here you basically have this massive, hundreds of millions of users, right, on the App Store that Apple kind of had in their in their corner, just under their protection. We're going to monitor and handle all the transactions. We're going to protect their privacy. And in essence, this is opening the floodgate for any developer to just say, hey, I want that contact information because I'm going to sell to them directly. I'm just curious your take, not as a representative of Krafton, but as someone that specializes, I suppose, in this type of privacy, what your thoughts are on the long-standing implications of that.
Yeah, I mean, well, if the user has given you their email, the game company or whoever is the app developer, and you have put out a notice that says, we collect information you give us, including your email, and we do these things. We do a bunch of things with it, right? I'm sure you guys have thumbed through a privacy notice at some point, right?
You're talking about those disclaimers that no one reads and we all throw away when I sign up for something.
And at the end of the day, you need something to put you to sleep, right? So you pull out your privacy notices you received that day, you read through them, and there you go.
Right. So I mean, presumably the notice provides notice that the company could contact you. The interesting point comes to where third parties may or may not be able to contact you. Depends on how specific that notice is, right? And to everyone's point, no one reads those, or at least that's the
is
word
that the
on
goal,
street,
Steve,
right?
of privacy law? Is this? It has to be so. It's so long and so complicated.
Actually, it's trending to the opposite, Paul, and it's actually. What they're trying to do is make it so that it's readable, it's easy to understand for the common consumer, and so it's not supposed to be long. It's not supposed to be too detailed, but it's almost like we're stuck in a catch-22. We've got to provide notice so that you can anticipate we might email you if we get the chance to, or do something else with it. Otherwise, what's the alternative? We can't do it. B, we do it illegally. Or C, we have to maybe provide you with new notice. So now you're dealing with pop-up notifications to your app, or some sort of follow-up notice. You might have gotten these emails from a company you've never heard of, or that you dealt with 2 years ago. They're like, we take your privacy and security seriously. We're reaching out to you because we've changed something. And it's like, now I know something's shady, right? Like you wouldn't be sending me this if you didn't have something buttoned up, right? So it's like we're in a catch-22 trying to figure out what's the right way to do it, right? And to companies like Krafton, creating these notices and having this conversation is important. It's healthy for the businesses to figure out what are we supposed to do, what's the right thing to do. And what you're finding is for companies that operate on a global scale, it's not just sometimes what does the law require us to do? Let's just stop there. Let's just establish a program that we can apply across the board, and that's the best practices and what's really kind of good for our consumer. And so we are sensitive to our consumer and our gamers that play our game. What do they expect? What would be too intrusive? What would be too cumbersome in the process of interacting with the product? All that is factored into the equation, and the output is again, it's a risk-based analysis and recommendation that ultimately you do X, Y, and Z, and these are the varying risks involved in each.
It's funny because there is so much just learned behavior, though, right? Like, when's the last time you guys watched an ad on YouTube and didn't press skip like immediately?
Absolutely.
These privacy policies, getting people to actually pay attention to them. It's a sort of a generic question, but there's going to be some moment where that will have to change, I would think. I don't know what is the impetus for that, right? Where people start to go, wait a second, I really need to read this.
I'll add one more thing and let you go. Sorry. One of the things that's interesting is that sometimes tech companies create standards that are probably more impactful than laws. Let me give you an example. Facebook and Apple. On their platforms, they have now created new rules, particularly Apple and apps, in what you're disclosing and how you're disclosing it to the user. And so by playing by Apple's rules in order to be on the Apple Store, you have to disclose things and present it in a way that they are intending on presenting it to the user. And it's more icons, more pictures effectively to make it easier to digest and compartmentalize in such a way that you could skim it, but you could still get a sense of what they're doing with your data. And that's not necessarily a law that requires them to use logos. But that's their way of doing it, and they're pushing it on the people who are on their platform, which has an effect of being like this new law that everyone needs to comply with. It's very interesting.
Jimmy, sorry.
I had one add-on to that, because we keep talking also about just this concept of the user's data being put from one hand to the other. I'm also thinking about data breaches, right? Because when you transfer that person's data, I mean, one of the things I love so much about the current age of user accounts is your ability to OAuth into any platform through your Gmail or through your iCloud, right? Because you feel secure with those two providers having your data and knowing that if you just allow them limited access to that app, that you feel, I feel semi-protected. Again, me having a layman's understanding of that process. And I'm curious also as to, I don't know, the potential for that data to then get attacked or otherwise become vulnerable as you take it outside of Apple's stronghold and you now start giving it to all these different third-party developers. So
yeah, that was one of their positions why they needed to have such a garden around their processes because of cybersecurity and anti-fraud stuff. And frankly, other than just the fact that we're giving our data to a video game or an app, the concerns are the same industry-wide, right, or across industries. So kind of going back to our theme of what we're talking about, where legal issues in video games are different or similar to other industries. This is one of those that's very similar to other businesses. Everyone's, to the extent you have personal data, contact data, the only thing that's maybe unique, you have to understand what kind of personal data you have as a company. How sensitive is it? And the more sensitive you get, the higher the risk goes up in terms of a potential incident. We call them incidents. It starts as an incident. You don't want to just start throwing out the breach word because you don't know if it qualifies as a breach just yet. So you figure out, if an incident is to happen, it's almost like an inevitability. You assess it and you try to gauge it from there. So.
Well, and I think that, when you talk about it being inevitable, right? I mean, whether it's Apple, whether it's Google, whether it's, two guys in an app, it is basically it's a, not an if, it's a when kind of thing, right? And, by no means am I, a security expert, right? But one of the things that you think about from a security standpoint, right, is dwell time, right? Like you're going to face intrusions all the time, right? How quickly can you get somebody out of your system that gets in? And the more stuff that gets in one place, the bigger a target something also becomes, right?
Nate, I have one last question for you on PUBG before we move on to just this last topic, quick topic I had here. But the question is about cheating in esports and sort of the legal repercussions around that, because we've talked about incidents on the podcast. We've talked about commissions being set up, and we've talked about the FBI having like an esports cheating unit, whatever. How do you guys look at PUBG esports and cheating and sort of the legal end of it?
Yeah, so cheating is interesting, right? And we mentioned earlier, right, about the kind of idea that some stuff you draw from traditional sports, right? But for some things, there isn't kind of like that one-to-one corollary, right? Certainly, cheating has been something that you've had in traditional sports. The ways you can cheat are also now different, right?
Right, like is a 14-year-old who's taking Adderall, right? Like does this disqualify them from a PUBG Mobile tournament, right?
Yeah. So look, I mean, one of the things that you still have some of the traditional ways to cheat, right? Performance enhancing drugs, right? And what the performance enhancing drugs look like maybe are a little bit different, right? And maybe even if you didn't necessarily buy the competitive advantage for some of these things, you might think, look, I don't want a bunch of people on Adderall. I don't want a bunch of people pounding 8 cans of Monster, getting through, one, day of an Overwatch stand, right? But again, a lot of that's not new, right? I remember reading Ball 4 from the 70s for baseball, right? And they talk about the fact that people use amphetamines so commonly that if you weren't on amphetamines, they referred to it as playing naked. Like that was the opposite of normal, essentially. So look, you definitely have to deal with some technical sorts of issues, right? So one of the things you're going to have is you're going to have your apps that are looking for, cheats that are in play, or looking for unauthorized apps that are being used at the same time as the game's being used, right? And you can get into some challenges where you might not necessarily in all cases be able to tell what that app was. And one could probably make some choices, a competitive scene could make some choices in terms of sort of, burden of proof. Whose responsibility is that, right? Certainly in the esports scene, one of the things that you have going on in 2020, 2021 is, you've got a lot more stuff that's switching to an online setup, right? That probably does present greater risk of people cheating. It's no longer a closed system. It's no longer, everybody playing on, on setups that have been provided by the tournament operator. Like everything else, it could be a little bit reactive, right? You see sort of, different rules that people have, right? Some of those rules that say like, oh, you can't look at, the screen that's available to the audience, right? Well, that happened because somebody, right, at a LAN, right, started going like this to try and see where everybody was, right, on the map with information he's not supposed to have, right? So there is, some reactive nature to it.
We had that rule back in 4-player GoldenEye. You can't don't look at that.
But there's a fascinating sort of problem here, which is, as you said, as more of these move online, and I would argue even as more of esports moves to third-party tournament operator, right? Like PUBG today, I'm not actually sure. I don't know what percentage of all esports events are produced directly by Krafton, or how many are produced by third-party tournament operators. But I would think the further it gets from you, the more online it is and the more in the hands of a third-party operator, the greater the risk becomes, right? And I feel like there's brand risk and reputational risk there also, even if it's not a Krafton sponsored, tournament, PUBG official. Are these things you think about, Nate, as Yeah,
I think it is something that you do want to think about. One, we do have competitions in which are run by a third-party tournament operator. And obviously we have esports in lots of regions. It can vary region by region, both in terms of what tournament operators we use, but also, how involved we are directly in running the competition. But you also have competitions that are, really completely third-party competitions, right? We had a decent-sized competition last year run by Samsung, right? It was licensed from us, a Samsung-branded event. They had their own third-party operator that they're using for it, right? Obviously, we give them certain technical access to make the event happen, but other than that, we're not involved. To your point of reputational risk, I remember a couple of years ago being at an event, an esports lawyer group event, and somebody was kind of complaining about how when there was an issue in Valve competitions, they couldn't get Valve on the phone to talk about it. And I'm thinking, well, Valve doesn't really have much of anything to do with any of their esports competitions. So they're probably thinking, stop calling me. That has nothing to do with me. That was my game, but, that was somebody else's competition. So there definitely is a range in terms of, how much people want to be, controlling their ecosystem. Some publishers definitely do it more than others. And they want that high quality product. That's definitely kind of part of it. The other big thing, right, that, let's face it, is in the pipeline and is going to change it, right? We talked about gambling earlier. As the gambling money goes up, the cheating scandals, the match fixing scandals will follow, right? It's a lot easier to get somebody, to throw a match for, X percent of a lot of money than a bigger X percent of not a lot of money. So it just is, it's going to follow. You're going to see more and more of it as gambling on esports, becomes a bigger thing.
It's a lot easier to take a dive in an esport. I feel like it's a lot less obvious. Guys, I just want to touch on this quickly. I have one quick question on this last article because it's another legal issue that came up this week, and I want to take advantage. This one may be a bit touchier. The headline here: Overwatch renaming McCree due to Blizzard lawsuit. And the reason they're doing this is because Jesse McCree, the character in Overwatch, was named after a real developer that was involved in those sexual harassment allegations. So Activision Blizzard is going to have this new narrative arc that gives him a new name. I don't want to get into sort of the nitty gritty here of the allegations or this developer or anything. I'm just curious, from a legal standpoint, from a lawyer standpoint, does this solve all of Activision Blizzard's problems, right? They just rename the character. Everyone's happy. We all sing Kumbaya and everything's good. Or is this PR or is this legal driving this? I guess is maybe a better way to phrase that question.
I'll start by saying I would be surprised if this question was even presented to legal. I mean, I don't even know if this is one of those questions you would bring to legal. It just sounds so much in a business decision, maybe because it's tied to the allegations, or really what it's tied to is complaints related to people who were involved in how they're still in the game, right? Whether it was World of Warcraft characters and people finding them and saying, "Oh, please take this out," right? That's more of a PR thing. And so I'd be surprised if actually this even was, needed to be brought to legal or was brought to legal. But
interesting.
Yeah, I think, look, without saying anything about whether or not, about the claims or anything else, let's just say for a moment, let's presume for a moment, right, that there was, some hurt there, right? And, sticking with that for sake of argument, yeah, you could say there's a PR component, but I think that, there is a real point of trying to say, sort of I hear you, we're what you say, what you celebrate, etc. I think, it is something that people can, take hurt from. And I think there's a lot of corollaries to potentially draw to some of the debates around things like, statues of Confederate generals and stuff like that, right? Without taking a stake on, either issue, right? There's people sort of saying, look, I mean, this is a painful reminder, right? And if you think that that's a painful reminder to somebody, I think that something can have a meaning beyond just PR. Again, not saying I don't know anything about, frankly, any of the allegations, even about that specific individual, but assuming that there was a pain there, I think taking that away, I think could be potentially have those benefits.
From a legal standpoint, does that help to reduce some kind of damage? Will a judge look at that and go, well, they're making an effort to sort of make reparations here and to do the right thing, and therefore you put them in a little bit better legal standing, or does that have no impact really?
So this requires the classic lawyer response.
It depends.
It will depend on so many things. It very well could. But I could, it could also just get swept under the rug with all the other facts and circumstances surrounding this thing. It might just be an oversight at some point. So who knows?
Guys, I can't think.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in my former world, because you guys know I don't practice anymore, subsequent remedial measures, things after the fact, usually taken with less or have less weight, right, than something that was going on simultaneously. Or it's hard to say, like Steve said, because depending on what ears this falls on or lands on, we're all people at the end of the day. So you're also not just comparing black and white letters of the law with emotions and feelings in someone that might want to believe in good or not. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that in my world, usually things that happen after the fact aren't even considered. You don't even submit that. But that was very different.
Jimmy, I love that there's no better way to wrap up an episode with three lawyers than on an "it depends" answer. I mean, I can't think of anything quite a bit more fitting.
Can that be the thumbnail? Is all of us shrugging? Like,
It depends. There you go. Yeah, we'll capture this. Guys, Steve, Nate, you guys are amazing. We have to have you back every time there's
Your
legal,
first 3 time.
That's it. The first 3 that would be the first 3 time. But how can people find you, follow you, if you want to be found, if you want to be followed?
There's not too many Blickensdorfers out there, so a quick Google search will probably find all of my background talking about being privacy. But at SBlicken, SBLICKEN, is my Twitter handle. That's probably where you can find me the best.
Nate,
Yeah,
how about
so
you?
LinkedIn would be probably the best for me. My Twitter is something that I use so infrequently that I don't even remember the exact handle for it. So I would say LinkedIn is the way to go there.
Very cool. Thank you guys so much. It's always insightful. I always find it fascinating. Not being a lawyer, I find it especially fascinating. I know our audience will as well. Just a quick reminder to our audience, every Wednesday night, guys, we do an after show. We cover a lot of the news that we don't get to on the podcast. We do it live, so it's a lot of fun. We do it with you, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. We stream it everywhere. So anywhere you find Business of Esports content, you can find it. William, Jimmy, thank you guys as always. And we will see you guys next week.
Bye, guys.
Sounds good.